Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a player that seems to only want to play Dungeons & Dragons for his own horny reasons. A story about a dungeon master that can't help but bring his femdom fetish into the game, and much more. But first, an important message from Nipsey.
Remember to like, comment and subscribe. I really like this bed.
Thanks Nipsey, I hope they like the video too. But with that said, let's get into these D&D horror stories. Sir Lovelace just wanted one simple thing. By Reddit user, Desperate Landlady. This is the first time I write here, and it isn't a very long story, since the guy got booted after only 2 sessions. But I've had to share this because it's still making me laugh. I joined this group through a Dungeons & Dragons Discord server, and to my knowledge, none of the players or the Dungeon Master knew each other prior. The group consisted of the Dungeon Master, Knight, a male fighter with a knight background, Rogue, a female tabaxi, Cleric, a female dwarf, and Warlock, me. Meeting and speaking to the players went just fine, and I saw no real red flags going into it. This Dungeon Master had an interesting idea for how to ease the characters into his campaign. He aimed to host a smaller adventure first, so everyone could get to know each other and how to work together before the big stuff. So we started with a simple dungeon crawl. It's explained that we are adventurers that came together taking on this commission to stop some kobold necromancer causing a ruckus. Knight is using the retainer background feature, so he is joined by 3 female attendants, one of which being an esquire noble. Before we even set foot inside the dungeon, the knight is already trying to flirt with one of his retainers. They are handled as NPCs, so the dungeon master is controlling them and plays them as not receptive to his advances, so she turns him down. Knight doesn't seem very happy about it, but he accepts the no. After a few battles with undead, we are battered enough to warrant a short rest, before going up against the boss of the dungeon. During the rest, Knight is at it again and tries to flirt with the second retainer, but this time says things like, "Remember, you're sworn to serve me in any way I want." But the dungeon master turns him down yet again, and reminds him that the feature says that they are free to leave and will if mistreated. Knight still insists with, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, "You're a low-born wench, so you will sleep with me if I tell you to." Well, the dungeon master warned him. The retainer says, "I cannot work under these conditions," and leaves together with the first retainer, leaving him with just the squire. Knight whines about the loss because now his background feature is left at 1/3 power, but eventually accepts the DM's ruling after he says, "If you behave, you can hire other retainers when you return to your estate." We finish our rest, face the kobold necromancer, and slay it without much issue. Celebrations are had, and we divvy up some loot between us. It seems like a good spot to end the session, so we do, and talk about the adventure so far. Everyone is liking it, except for Knight. He complains that, "You said sexual content isn't off the table." But the Dungeon Master defends his rulings with, "Well, you can't bed just anyone, and you can't use sexual harassment. Nobody is going to like that." It's very low energy bickering, but it seems like the only takeaway Knight had was that sexual content is still game, and his squire's booty is a valid target. On comes Session 2 a week later. We continue where we left off last time and travel to the nearest city. It becomes apparent that Rogue and Cleric are starting to get something going on between them, and that they had been role-playing alone between sessions. Their talk is more flirty, and I guess that's all the encouragement Knight needed to finally try to get it on with his squire, but he comes on way too strong by saying stuff like, "Knight, your duties include to polish my spear." Squire, "But you use a sword, my lord." Knight, "I'm talking about the other spear. Wink." Obviously, this doesn't go down well, and the squire says, I am of noble blood. I don't have to take this crap from you," and then storms off. Knight complains yet again, and the Dungeon Master reminds him that he can't talk to women like that if he wants success, and that he can recruit replacement retainers later. Knight then sighs very loudly, but rolls with it. We decide to head to the tavern to get a drink and look for some more commissions. I knew it was a really bad idea, but I wanted to see where this was going. Knight: "There are tavern wenches, right?" Dungeon Master: "Yes." Knight: "I slap one of them on the ass when she walks by." The Dungeon Master with a sigh: "You slap her on the butt, and she spins around and slaps your face in return." I guess that was the last drop, even though it should have been obvious what was going to happen. Knight starts yelling off about how unfair it is that the dwarf got a hot cat girl waifu, but he constantly got shot down by the Dungeon Master, and how the Dungeon Master is singling him out and is giving out misleading info. He specifically yelled, and I quote, "My character got the biggest set of blue balls. What do I need to do to get my dick sucked around here?" At that point, the Dungeon Master just banned the guy from the server and kicked him out of the Roll20 campaign. It got less exciting with that guy gone, but I'm enjoying the group so far. We're still playing as a 3-man team, with an eye out for a 4th player. Yeah, it certainly seemed like the Knight player was really only interested in one thing. I think the Dungeon Master handled this player exactly as he should have, and according to the rules of the retrainer background. Heck, the Dungeon Master even told Knight after the first attempt that the retainers could leave of their own volition if they are mistreated, but that just didn't seem to get through Knight's thick and horny skull. I also have to say that the reaction of the barmaid to Knight slapping her butt was also the appropriate outcome. Thankfully, after the Knight blew up on the Dungeon Master, he just got banned, and the game was able to continue on after his departure. Let's move on. Our Dungeon Master is dating a player, and it's making her a problem player. By Reddit user UnfairKnight4529. For the sake of privacy and anonymity, I'm going to keep this as vague as possible while doing my best to explain our problem. We're a group of 5 girls, 4 players and the Dungeon Master. We have been friends for years before we got interested in Dungeons & Dragons. 2 of us have been friends for over 10 years. The 3rd one met us about 7 years ago, and the 4th one befriended us 5 years ago. This last girl began dating her now girlfriend a little over a year ago, and all 5 of us get along great, and still do. A while back, we found out our friend's girlfriend has played Dungeons & Dragons, and she offered a Dungeon Master since she's had experience. We were all so excited because we would finally get a chance to play. We plan a session 0, and we're all so excited. But we notice our Dungeon Master barely has any interest in what we're making, but gives her girlfriend her undivided attention. The Dungeon Master asked us all to write out our characters' backstories by a deadline so that she could read them to prepare for the campaign. While the rest of us do our best to research the kinds of characters that we're making, and do our very best to give the Dungeon Master good backstories, the Dungeon Master practically does all of the work for her girlfriend after she threw a fit because she didn't understand how this all worked. Session 1 rolls around, and at some point, the party splits up to investigate our surroundings. We all paid attention to everything that was going on, but the Dungeon Master's girlfriend mentally checked out whenever her character was not involved. While one half of the group roleplayed and discussed things, Dungeon Master's girlfriend kept whispering at her, not paying attention. Once the group got together, Dungeon Master's girlfriend barely made an effort to be a part of the group. Whenever we got together to discuss our next move or roleplay, she would once again check out, or roll for things on her own, only consulting the Dungeon Master and having no regard for the rest of the group. Not to mention, it turns out that Dungeon Master didn't read a single one of our backstories, as they stated this fact, and basically spoon-fed girlfriends to her. After that first session, we chucked it up to this being our first session, and hoped things would get better as time progressed. But we were wrong. Session 2 rolled around, and the same behaviors from Session 1 continued. During this session, one of the girls found some loot, and before we can come together to discuss how we are splitting it, Dungeon Master's girlfriend took over and began telling everyone what part of the loot went to who, and the Dungeon Master allowed it. On Session 3, Dungeon Master's girlfriend threw a fit and gave everyone the silent treatment when she got outvoted on how to approach the dungeon we encountered, and the Dungeon Master began nudging the story in a way that made her girlfriend's character pull off what she wanted. We finished Session 4 tonight. We were just starting a mission that required us to be extra stealthy. While we kept role-playing and planning on how to go about it, Dungeon Master's girlfriend kept rolling for checks and actions without telling anyone what she was doing, but kept whispering to the Dungeon Master what she was rolling for. She ended up exposing the party and almost got us TPK'd. We are at a loss of what to do. We are all good friends, but we feel that if we continue playing Dungeons & Dragons the way we are, we'll be losing 2 friends soon. The favoritism is so obvious, but we don't know how to approach the Dungeon Master about it without pissing her girlfriend off. The majority of the group feels like we're all just side characters, with the Dungeon Master not caring about our characters and favoring their girlfriend. Any advice for this group of newbies? Well, that certainly sounds like a bit of favoritism going on there. At first, when the Dungeon Master was helping her girlfriend with her character creation, I wouldn't call that a red flag per se. I mean, character creation for a first-timer can be a bit overwhelming, and I personally needed a bit of guidance for the first character I made. Though, with the girlfriend's disinterest in the game when she wasn't directly involved, to the Dungeon Master skewing things to go her way when she was outvoted, and to the Dungeon Master flat out saying that she didn't read anyone else's backstories, it's pretty obvious that there was favoritism going on there. My advice would be to just talk things out as a group, and just let the Dungeon Master and her girlfriend know how you all feel. Otherwise, things aren't likely to change. Hopefully, the Dungeon Master and her girlfriend will be understanding, and try to course correct so that the game is fun for everyone involved. Though, what advice would you all give OP here? On to the next post. Dungeon Master ruins a plotline that could have been great for world building by fetishizing it. By Reddit user Expert Individual 185. A table I played at a little while ago. There was a little plotline involving the royals of the kingdom that the campaign was set in, and how they really aren't who they're cracked up to be. Specifically, the king and the older princess. The first in line to the throne is Princess Seraphina, who has many allegations of corruption, violations of trade agreements, and even the molding of slaves, many of which are children. The younger prince, Alaric, is 12 years old, and has been tortured to have the memories of his father orchestrating a massacre erased, and the torture essentially lobotomized him, turning him into an obedient, almost robotic boy. The youngest princess is hidden from the public and kept in the cellar, due to her status as a bastard, since the queen had an affair with a knight, and died after giving birth to the princess. This was an amazing plotline, as the biological father of the younger princess helped us free his daughter, and they have a happy ending. Here comes the horror part. The Dungeon Master was notorious in the chat board for having a femdom fetish, which he projected onto us in the story of the oldest prince, Ramiel. When we meet Ramiel, we know that he resents his wife, Shara, due to his father's preference for her over him, since she's more traditionally masculine and stronger than he is. How she's rarely home and leaves him to care for their disturbing amount of children, and how she's always drunk when coming home and acts aggressive towards him and their children. We learned their backstory, where Ramiel got captured, and Shara was a mercenary who rescued him, and the prize was Ramiel's hand in marriage. The first red flag was the age difference, where Ramiel was 17 and Shara was 25 when she rescued him, and it's been 10 years since. But then there was a strong implication that Shara essentially coerced Ramiel into having sex with her as a reward, and threatened to chop off his dingaling if he said no. A tablemate told the Dungeon Master that that was completely unnecessary to the plot. He also mentioned that they have so many children because when she approaches him to have sex with her, he's so terrified of saying no to her that he, quote, consents. I thought this could have been a dark look into an abusive marriage, with the wife being a predatory drunk abuser. But the last straw came when there was a scene where we were infiltrating the palace and walked by their door and heard them having sex. This scene was initially disturbing as we hear Shara brutally beat their oldest son after he walked in on them. But then it became disgusting when it was implied that Ramiel enjoyed being abused and essentially raped by Shara, with the justification being that he's a masochist. That was the final red flag for me to essentially drop out of the game. I said that I would never play in any games that this man would be dungeon mastering anymore. TLDR: Dungeon Master fetishizes plotline involving domestic abuse towards a man. I swear, I'll never understand the mindset of people that want to bring their fetishes into games of Dungeons & Dragons and expose them to other unwilling players. It is a shame too, because the rest of the royal family stories were pretty intriguing, like some Game of Thrones type stuff. OP did do the right thing though by leaving, because it made them uncomfortable. On to the next one. Whiny Player gets mad that the entire party doesn't go back on a side mission everyone agreed to because he didn't. He then proceeded to nearly make the Dungeon Master cry by calling her campaign, quote, padded. By Reddit user Expert Individual 185. I joined this table where it's a world that has a war going on that's escalated into one of those, quote, war to end all wars, where this will change the world forever. And we're either going to make sure the war has an outcome where the world is benefited from it. Overall, the campaign was pretty epic, with all the different factions being so different and the large-scale battles. This was a good 90 hours of gameplay in total, but there was one player that made 30 of those hours absolutely excruciating. This player was notorious for being quite selfish and always tried to ensure the survival of his own characters, sometimes even throwing party members under the bus to do so. And whenever the party did something selfless, he would bitch, cry, and moan like a child. Whether it was freeing slaves, retrieving food for starving villagers in a famine, or getting a stolen family heirloom back from a robber, he would complain the whole time. There is this place in the world known as the Paradise, a place where there's plenty of food, nice weather, but only the people who are pure of heart can go there, meaning that people will use it as a safe haven from the war. In this quest, we were supposed to escort a refugee family to the Paradise. The mother was pregnant, the father was very sick, their son was blind, and their daughter had anxiety, but they had each other and loved each other very much. The whole party essentially unanimously decided to help them because we weren't heartless monsters. Except, of course, this a-hole. He just said no and got confused when we started doing the quest. He said that because he said no, that they can't do the quest because the whole party has to do the quest. The Dungeon Master herself said that he doesn't need to do the quest, so he just huffed and stomped along with us. Throughout the mission, which took a couple of hours, he was acting like a passive-aggressive dickwad, and would make snide comments and jokes about the son being blind. Though I have to admit, some of them were pretty effing funny. But eventually, I got fed up with his whining and said that he can either shut up or get his ass on the bench, which he did. After the quest, he had the audacity to say that we can't do side quests anymore, because they're, quote, boring filler, and slowing down the game, which hurt our Dungeon Master's feelings, as she put a lot of effort into making the world feel big, and loved writing the side quests, as they added to the campaign's world, and made it feel lived in. He then doubled down, saying that he just wants this campaign to end, and that we're, quote, forcing him to play, and the only reason he's still playing is because he can't have 2 games going at once. The Dungeon Master was on the verge of tears because he didn't want to play and was just playing out of obligation. For this, the entire party voted him off the table, and he looked both annoyed and relieved by this. We then got back to playing, and it was amazing. Also, since I was the one that was praising her for having such well-written side quests, the woman we were escorting gave birth to unexpected twins and only came up with a name for one of them, and they named the other baby after my character. So that's a win. Man, OP was right. What a dickwad. I understand that certain games aren't for everyone, and if that's the case, just don't play in that game. Don't stick around and just act like a spoiled child when the narrative doesn't go your way, and insult the Dungeon Master that spends their precious time working on story arcs and quests for the players to enjoy. At least the table didn't stand for this and voted him out, and by the sounds of it, this player didn't mind. Thankfully, it sounds like the game is still going, and everyone is back to having a great time. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.